So, Anne Foley, you are the costume designer on Altered Carbon, Netflix's new dystopian future show. I'm curious, there's been so many TV shows and movies that look at the future and the perils of it that we anticipate. So, I'm curious, what did you think you could bring that was new to it in terms of costume design?
Well, I think that the challenge when you're designing anything that's futuristic is trying to keep it grounded and keep it believable, and or at least that was my challenge on this show, and not taking the audience out of the story. And you know, in Altered Carbon specifically, we're 300 years in the future, and our visual effects and our production design were so beautifully elaborate. And the most important thing was to make sure that my costumes integrated perfectly and beautifully into this amazing world that Everett Burrell and Carrie Meyer designed. And and that was one of the first conversations that I had with Lita Kalaritis when I came onto the show about, let's keep it gritty, let's keep it grounded, let's keep it believable, so that the audience is going to have a visceral reaction to what's happening, because they're going to be able to relate to these people, because they're not dressed in some wacky, crazy sci-fi kind of way. They're dressed in something that they can relate to. And also, at the heart of the story with Altered Carbon, it's an old-fashioned noir story. So, the idea of drawing from the past to create the future was something that really appealed to me.
We'll talk a bit about the plot of the show, and I guess what attracted you to that specific futuristic story.
Well, when I read the script for this, I was completely blown away. It was just something so different from anything that I'd ever worked on in my career, whether as an assistant or even as a designer. And I I was just so excited by the possibility of what we could do. And of course, the first thing that caught my eye when I read it was the SeaTac Praetorians and getting to design those costumes and those characters. And that was probably one of the biggest highlights on the show for me. And, you know, I worked really closely with Miguel Sapochnik, who is the director on the pilot, about what we were trying to say, you know, what we wanted these guys to look like, and what we wanted to tell the audience. For me, the most important thing was I didn't want the audience to know who these guys were when they came in. Were they alien? Were they human? You know, who were they? I didn't want them to know until they took the helmet off. And then you saw that there was a human in there. And, but also, you know, at the same time, one of the bigger challenges was trying to, you know, design these in a way that the stunt guys could do all of that action and nobody was going to get hurt. And so we built the costumes out of this urethane, which is a plastic, but in a rubber, but it's painted to look like it's metal. And so that these guys could fight and do everything they needed to do in this costume. And it functioned not only as protection, but it was, you know, the look of it, and the costume was great too.
In terms of color and things like that, can you talk a bit about what your ideas were for things like that?
Well, I think that for the palette of the show, you know, again, Lita was very specific. We wanted a palette for the grounders versus the myths. And, you know, with the grounders, there was a lot more color. It was a lot more saturated. There was, you know, a lot of polyesters and rayons and man-made fabrics and plastics, you know, things that had been recycled, things that, you know, reused, and actually things from all over the world to make it feel very multicultural and like a melting pot. And so, you know, that was sort of the basis for the grounders, where with the meths who live in the Arium up in the clouds, you know, we stuck to a more, a lighter palette with them. They have all the money, they have all the resources, So their fabrics are going to be cottons and wools, things that the grounders don't really have access to. And the palette was much lighter, like a cloud. And specifically with Miriam, we focused on a lot of, sheer fabrics for her as well. And that really helped sort of set that very distinct tone between what was happening in the Arium and what was happening down on the ground.
In terms of making designs that are for, excuse me, specific characters, as in clothes that these people would wear, can you talk a bit about that?
Well, I think that it's always, the script was so beautifully nuanced, and that's one of the things that I love the most about Lita and her writing is that it was right there on the page, who these characters were. But, as a costume designer, it's our job to be a storyteller as well. And we're trying to inform the audience who these characters are based off of what they're wearing. And Rylene is a really great example of that. I looked at who she was and where she and Kovacs grew up, which was in Harlan's World, which is this beautifully lush green environment. And so, I used that color green for her as kind of like a touchstone. So all of her costumes across the board always have, that little bit of green in them somewhere. And that's like her signature. And the thing that's great about something like that is for an actress like Dichen Lockman, who plays Rylene, it also gives her a little bit of something else to work with. And, and it's really important to me to work with the actors, to collaborate with them in helping to develop their characters and, and even their costumes, because I'm not only collaborating with the production designer, VFX, stunts, props, every other department, but also with the actors, because ultimately at the end of the day, these are their characters that they're playing, and it's important for them to know that they can collaborate with me about that. And some of the best ideas actually will come out of a fitting that an actor brought to the table.
Well, we'll talk a bit more about that in relation to the show. Take us to those fittings, and when the actors come in and start looking at the designs that you have, what's that give and take like?
Well, it's great. I mean, it's really wonderful because sometimes they'll put a piece of clothing on and they'll be like, oh my God, there he or she is. Now I know who this person is. And, like a great example again with Rylene in her fight drum costume. In the script, it says this person comes down from the ceiling on a rope and has a hood on. You're not supposed to know if it's a man. You're not supposed to know if it's a woman, because we're going to have a reveal at the end of the episode. But, this person has to come down and then have this incredibly elaborate fight sequence with not only a gun, but with a samurai sword. So when I was designing this, I had the props in the room with me with Dichen, and she could move and twirl around, and then those panels were flying out. And those are things that actually we really worked, we worked that into the scene as well. And you can see in it just really helped her get into that headspace of who this person was. Because she's a warrior. She is a fighter. And, we wanted her clothes to, reflect that, but just have incredible movement as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, you've worked on several films and television shows. Can you tell us a bit about doing a show on this scale, 10 episodes? What are some of the practical things you have to do in order to pull it off?
Well, I mean, I think the big difference between film and television, and I think anybody who's worked on both is going to tell you this, it's the time frame. Instead of having 3 months to develop something, you have sometimes 3 days. If you're lucky, you get 10 days. But so you don't always have that luxury of being able to illustrate a costume. Sometimes you just have to find a piece of fabric that inspires you and throw it on a mannequin and start working with your cutter fitter and, developing a costume. sometimes you do get lucky. I did have time with the troopers. I had time to, or the SeaTac Praetorians, I should say. I had time to them and work out what that costume was going to be. So it just depends, but TV moves at an incredibly lightning fast speed, and so you just have to learn to be able to move with that speed. And I will say 4 seasons on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. really helped me and gave me a really good base to be able to pull off a show, because there we're doing 22 episodes a season, and we're turning episodes around every 8 days, and you don't have a lot of time there, so you're trying to figure out how to get stuff done on a very, very condensed time schedule.
Was there a certain
costume
or something, a sequence that was particularly difficult for you to pull off?
No, I mean, I wouldn't say it like that. I think that overall it's, I mean, every show has its challenges, and you're never, ever going to have, in television, you're never going to have enough time. So you just have to make sure you surround yourself with an amazing crew, which I was incredibly blessed on the show to have an incredible team behind me that really helped me to pull this world off. My cutters, my cutter fitters, to my assistant designers, to my set crew, everybody played an incredible part on this show in helping bring this to the screen. And without each one of them, I never could have pulled it off.
Well, Ann Foley, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And,
congratulations on your work.
Congratulations on your work.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Same here. Have a good one.
Have a good one.
You too. Bye.